Hey, and welcome to the Transition Discoveries Learning Series. This video is all about supporting transition planning for young people with disabilities. Let's talk about a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, this video is designed to be interactive, and that means that you'll watch and at different points pause the video in order to reflect on some of the content. After each pause, we'll continue on, and the time points of these pauses will be listed for you in the video description in case you have to start the video over at any point. All practice activities will be done within a worksheet that you'll need to download from the Schoology course. The video will tell you when and how to work on this activity sheet. Finally, we recommend pausing the video if you need more time to engage with any of the text or visuals shown. For this video, we're going to unpack the secrets behind evidence-based practices for moving transition planning beyond compliance towards a commitment to person-centered practices. We'll do this by using the Transition Discovery Framework sub-indicators of transition planning in order to extend aspects of the already established process for meeting the requirements of Indicator 13. Our extensions are going to focus on increasing youth, family, and stakeholder collaboration during transition assessment, as well as co-creating the present level of academic and functional performance, the measurable transition goals, and the program of study to achieve them. We'll also break down how universal design for learning can be applied into the transition assessment process. Finally, we'll round out the conversation with evidence-based approaches to designing a program of study for independent living, post-secondary education, and employment-related goals. When it comes to transition planning, we often place a heavy focus on Indicator 13 compliance, and rightfully so. It's really critical that we ensure that all students have detailed transition goals developed from age-appropriate transition assessments, and that these goals are created in collaboration with students, families, and agencies. Then, we make sure that they are followed up with a detailed plan for a program of study and related services to support students in reaching their post-secondary goals. But what might an evidence-based approach to extending this model of transition planning look like if our goal is to increase the effectiveness of our transition assessments, creating a summary of performance, measurable goals, and the program of study? Well, the short answer is opportunities for youth and family involvement and leadership at all stages of the transition planning process. Before we really unpack this model for shifting beyond compliance to a commitment for building systems of support that empower youth and families, we need to first think about the Transition Discoveries Framework and the core principles that drive our work in transition planning. Authentic person and family-centered planning practices are really a model for how to take a whole person approach, and how doing so fundamentally changes the quality of supports that are built into our already existing and established transition planning processes. So person-centered thinking is a fundamental belief that young people are the absolute experts in their strengths, preferences, needs, and goals. We assume that they are fully capable to collaborate as partners in choosing and engaging with programs and opportunities that align with their strengths, goals, preferences, and needs, not just uniformly available services that are provided to them as clients of a system. Importantly, person-centered thinking understands that communication is a continuum that includes behaviors and ways of expression beyond speech and writing that are equally valid means of reflection, sharing, problem-solving, and decision-making. Person-centered thinking emphasizes the worth of the whole person, not fixing aspects of a person. It also understands that individuals with disabilities may have been denied opportunities in the past to develop their self-knowledge and self-determination skills. This is where person-centered practices come in as we work with individuals to help them build their knowledge about their strengths, goals, preferences, needs, and social capital so that we can share with them and they can share with us on how we can best support them within the context of their lives today, tomorrow, and in the years to come. Learning experiences coupled with person-centered assessment and opportunities for active decision-making represent person-centered practices that, when adopted by all staff, lead to person-centered organizations. As organizations become person-centered, the linkages between them foster person-centered systems that emphasize coordinating supports with individuals with disabilities who are seen as collaborators rather than clients of separate providers. Here we have the core components of transition planning that, when implemented together with fidelity, meet the requirements of Indicator 13. Given that student and family involvement is not only a requirement of this process, but also a significant factor in the effectiveness of creating and implementing a transition plan, taking a person-centered approach involves enriching and expanding opportunities for youth and family participation at each stage of this process. So here we have an extended evidence-based model of transition planning that really prioritizes youth and family engagement within already existing procedures and processes. Our inputs include our relevant laws and regulations, as well as equal participation by students, families, and stakeholders who serve as decision makers and knowledge brokers. And this means that they share their thoughts, experiences, and recommendations as active contributors to the transition planning process. So this information they share should be continually gathered through age-appropriate transition assessments that are both informal and formal and collected equally by students, families, and stakeholders. In addition, all assessment opportunities should be universally designed. Dr. Pam LeConte, a national leader in assessment and transition, believes that our mantra for transition assessment is, first, whose needs are being met, and that we should emphasize the individual's needs and the needs of families, not the needs of the system. Then, what have youth, families, and stakeholders learned from the transition assessment process? And how do we record that information? So what are the sources of information available to us? And thinking about that creatively and broadly so that young people, families, and stakeholders can provide information. And then engaging young people, families, and stakeholders together in the planning process and allowing assessment data from each of these sources to drive that planning process. So with this mantra in mind, age-appropriate transition assessments should be formal and informal. Formal assessments such as academic or behavioral evaluations are standardized and allowed for comparison of students according to some criterion, which is usually advanced, proficient, or primer. And informal assessments can be interviews, questionnaires, direct observations, often with a checklist, student reflections, and self-assessments. Importantly, both informal and formal assessments can be used to measure different aspects of a student's growth toward a specific transition goal. Speaking of transition assessment, it's not just about using multiple types of assessment. We also need to collect information from youth, families, and stakeholders with these different tools. Why? Well, the purpose of transition assessment is to build a complete picture of a student's interests, support needs, successful support strategies, and performance in various activities, as well as their family connections. We can't accomplish that with one or two sources of data that are collected from only stakeholders evaluating students. When data is collected about environments that students interact with, such as school, work, home, and when it's coupled with data from self-assessments and assessments by families and stakeholders, this together allows us to build an in-depth profile of a student's skills, knowledge, goals, their daily and weekly routines, maybe their responsibilities, their challenges and relationships or associations. That could include friendships and community connections across contexts, so school, home, work, and community. And when we develop a profile that's this in-depth, it helps us to understand what students do well and what environments do well for them. And in doing so, we learn about what students can improve on and what can be improved on in environments to better support students in reaching their goals for a desired level of independence related to post-secondary education, independent living, and employment. And these efforts result in student-centered transition goals and help us to identify options for skill building, supports, modifications, and connections in and outside of schools that both prepare students to reach their goals and improve the post-secondary environments that they're going to be going into. So informal approaches might include meeting and interviewing with people identified by the student and families as knowing the student best. And we might use age-appropriate informal and formal assessments as well as a record review, which could be academic, IEP, agencies, and providers, to couple some of these informal data sources together to really build out that full profile. We can also, and we definitely should, use real-world observations whenever possible. So in addition to assessment and interviews, if we're doing a discovery process, we want to spend time with young people in the community as they participate in their daily and weekly routines at school, work, leisure, shopping. And really the goal is to conduct direct observation to learn more about their strengths, preferences, and needs across these different contexts. It's important to gather information on how these social and physical environments support and challenge a student's success towards their transition goals. Universal design for learning involves proactively designing instruction to provide multiple means for representation, engagement, and action or expression. Universal design for transition assessment employs all the principles of universal design through the transition planning process. And doing so can provide practitioners with strategies and examples for proactively ensuring that informal transition assessments are accessible to all students. Transition assessments that consider the intersectionality of diversity in language, culture, and socioeconomic status, in addition to student skills and characteristics, have the potential to increase equitable student participation in the transition planning process. Furthermore, barriers to accessibility and equity are driven by the designs of informal transition assessments and formal transition assessment tools, not the characteristics of students themselves. Therefore, applying the principles of universal design into transition assessment has the potential to increase equity by providing multiple opportunities for students to comprehend and respond to assessment questions as they connect knowledge and skills to their life experiences. By infusing universal design into transition assessment, diverse student groups are ensured opportunities for developing self-knowledge and how that knowledge can be applied toward creating goals and achieving post-secondary plans. So some ways that we can ensure that our assessments in the transition planning process provide multiple means of representation are to check them for comprehensible language, appropriate vocabulary, and unnecessarily complex sentences. We could use tools like readable.com or Grammarly to check the readability. We want to make sure that we're using multiple ways of representing both the questions themselves, so color, pictures, symbols, audio, text, text-to-speech, and also the response options, particularly on informal assessments like an inventory, that not only are the questions displayed and represented in multiple modalities, but also the choice options are as well. In terms of ensuring that our transition assessments provide multiple engagement for preferences and needs, we want to make sure that the amount of questions that is shown at the same time has been set to a level that will support the readability and comprehension of the assessment by reducing something we call information overload. So not presenting all the information at once, but doing it in a staggered way that kind of chunks it out. So this might be 1, 2, 3, 4 questions at a time. And really what it depends on is what students are telling you is best for them. We can also ensure that students are aware of the different options that they have to complete the assessment, so that might be chunking it out or taking breaks. We make sure that students also have opportunities to talk about the purpose of assessments in their daily lives and in relation to their future goals, so they have an investment in this assessment process. Finally, want to make sure that assessments provide real-time feedback so that students can self-monitor their growth and progress. So we might, during the assessment process, show student how many questions they've completed. After they're done, we want to show them the results of that report, and each time and over time, so not just once, but each time they engage in different assessments, we want to show them those results and kind of unpack it with them. And finally, in providing multiple options for action expression in the transition assessment process, we can make sure that there are multiple ways for students to respond to each question. So when we were talking about these different modalities for presenting the information, we also want to provide those modalities for them to respond. So that means not just having text, but also the availability to speak or do text-to-speech and audio or pictures, video, symbols, colors, because we understand that communication can look different for each student, and we presume that all students are capable of sharing their experiences and knowledge and skills. We can also use, if we're taking a digital approach, tablets or phones, because they have an option for feedback, haptic feedback that be changed on the fly. So then you can have clicks or vibrations when the screen is touched, and that's another way to help students when they're getting engaged and providing their responses on that transition assessment. And we ensure that the use of those features, if we're going to provide them, and all these features we've talked about, are consistently available for all students to choose from. Take some time here to reflect on these questions in your video worksheet. You'll need to download that video worksheet from the Schoology course if you haven't done so already. And once you've completed this pause and practice, you can resume the video and we'll continue talking about transition planning. So since transition assessment is an ongoing process focused on measuring growth, we need to use new or additional assessments as students achieve their annually updated transition goals. Many assessments are designed in a leveled approach. That means that they measure a specific range of a particular skill. Students above that skill range, either due to performance or age, would be poorly evaluated with that tool, since they would likely always score at the highest possible level given that they might have already mastered it, or the lowest if they haven't had access to programs or services to support it yet. Given that we focus on figuring out where students are in order to make data-informed decisions about where they want to go and how close they are to getting there, a tool like this really wouldn't support that effort. So appropriate means that we need to match what our students can do with a tool that measures where they are and above their current level of performance so that we can measure their growth over time. When transition assessment is implemented formatively, we have the opportunity to use it as an instructional tool and as a way of improving the capacity of students to take an active leadership role in their transition planning process. More specifically, we can use it to help them build their self-knowledge and their ability to make informed decisions about their goals and plans to achieve them. We can implement a cyclical process that begins with and maintains frequent and consistent use of both formal and informal transition assessments throughout the year, not once a year. It all depends on the student, family, and stakeholders working with them, but assessment should never be yearly. So we should set goals for using assessment throughout the semester and consistently across semesters. Frequent assessment alone may support student knowledge of their strengths, needs, abilities, and preferences, but the real impact comes in stakeholders taking the time to provide young people with opportunities for reviewing and reflecting on their transition assessment results, particularly their progress toward their transition goals. The emphasis of these opportunities should be helping students to understand where they started and how much they have improved so that they can choose new benchmarks for where they want to grow next and how much. When students understand their progress, they are then more prepared to work with their teams in making decisions about transition goals and the plans to reach them. Of course, we need to create spaces in these meetings for students to take on leadership roles and supplement in-meeting time with additional pre- and post-work with students to help them understand what was covered in these meetings and to prepare for the next meeting. Taking the time to work with students to help them to understand their transition assessment results can lead to students preparing presentations and talking points for their transition meetings that represent a higher level of decision-making than they might have previously been allowed or able to engage in. Taking a person-centered approach to the summary of performance involves young people, families, and stakeholders working collaboratively to draw upon the results of ongoing transition assessment in order to build an in-depth profile of a student across contexts, so that's school, home, work, and the community. And this profile should include their academic skills and needs, their behavioral needs, career interests, career awareness, occupational skills and soft skills, as well as communication skills, should include information about their preferences and sensory needs, as well as information on their current self-awareness, self-determination skills, and self-management skills. It should have information about their use of assistive technology, their skills for using it, and their current needs for assistive technology, as well as some information about their daily routines and responsibilities and the relationships that they have at home, at work, in the community, at school. And then by building this in-depth profile of student needs, the summary becomes a rich descriptive of the whole individual. And that is our true purpose of a person-centered approach to this summary, that it represents the trueness and the wholeness of the student. And in doing that, we better prepare teams of young people, families, and stakeholders down the road to work on student-centered transition goals and identifying skill-building opportunities and supports or modifications and connections that are going to help them reach those goals. So just to summarize, we think about transition assessment as this collaborative process between youth, families, and stakeholders that takes into account student strengths and needs while prioritizing opportunities for students to build their self-knowledge and self-determination skills. We need to set up an environment that supports young people to become active leaders in designing a person-centered summary and goals based upon their ongoing transition assessment data, because in doing so, we better prepare them to take an active role in developing a person-centered program of study to help them reach these goals. Speaking of setting goals, once we've collected transition assessment data and the team has reviewed it all together in order to make their summary and their profile of the student, our next step is to work directly with youth and families to help them create their appropriate, measurable, and person-centered post-secondary goals. These must be updated annually by the team and based on age-appropriate transition assessments while also being tied to their annual measurable goals. This is where our sub-indicators of transition planning and the required categories for goals under Indicator 13 come in. These categories include employment, independent living, and post-secondary education. The team of youth, families, and stakeholders must then work together to decide on a transition plan to reach their goals in each of these areas. This plan is a coordinated set of activities, services, and supports that are aligned to help young people in building specific skills and knowledge related to their measurable person-centered transition goals in that area. Youth and families need to have ongoing opportunities to provide recommendations on services and supports that they feel will help them best reach their goals. As the plan is implemented, the same principles of transition assessment that we've talked about in this video are then applied again during progress monitoring, including informal and formal assessment from multiple groups, so youth, families, and stakeholders, done on an ongoing basis with results utilized in continuing opportunities for youth and families to learn about where students are, where they started, and where they want to grow in order to reach their measurable goals for employment, post-secondary education, and independent living. Remember that these goals don't exist in a silo in terms of how they're created, measured, and reached, and changed and updated over time. They need to be designed to align with each other consistently and to build coherently toward broader overarching goals. For example, young people might want to live in a particular area, but that impacts their employment and post-secondary education. And how and where they want to live is also impacted by their employment and their post-secondary education. For the final part of this video, we'll unpack evidence-based approaches to creating and implementing a person-centered plan to help students and families reach their transition goals. We'll start off with getting students prepared for competitive employment after high school, and then we'll talk about preparing them for independent living and post-secondary education. Just remind yourself as we go through these three components that each of them exist together and relate to each other, that they aren't existing in silos apart from each other. A transition plan for employment should utilize curriculum, instruction, and learning experiences that helps students build their self-awareness and career awareness, including how their strengths, life goals, preferences, and needs relate to the responsibilities and requirements of different careers. This better equips students to engage with more advanced learning opportunities in and outside of school that focus on developing soft skills, self-management skills, job-seeking skills such as job searching, resume building, and interviewing, and occupation-specific skills. We support growth in these domains through direct and community-based instruction alongside paid and unpaid work-based learning experiences. Supporting a student's transition plan for their employment goals really begins way before that plan is made, with resources, policies, and training provided to stakeholders to make sure that the school and community and partners have the capacity to engage in developing opportunities for young people related to their goals. So helping them develop their specific knowledge and skills and providing them the opportunities they need to reach those goals. Sometimes this includes partnerships between schools with districts, agencies, and community partners like businesses and nonprofits in order to make those experiences happen. In terms of choosing and aligning those experiences, we really need to have ongoing informal and formal transition assessment data collected by students, families, and stakeholders to help us work with students to match their strengths, goals, needs, and preferences with these opportunities in school and outside of school so that they together align with their employment goals. Evidence-based practices for supporting self-determination skill development are really critical at this point too, because if students don't have opportunities to build their decision-making skills and self-knowledge, then they can't be an active participant and a leader in choosing opportunities that align with their goals. We also need to have student-led transition planning in collaboration with families and stakeholders. So it's not just that we have the data to inform what would match best with a student, and not just that we have to have students prepared to take a leadership role, but we also need to develop structures within our meetings that allow students to flex those skills and to take on that leadership role. And finally, if we do all of these 5 steps here, it results in a course of study and a transition plan that aligns strongly with both the students' goals and their career education, work standards, and needs and requirements of employers in the community. So this helps to best align young people and what they're interested in and what they're good at and what they'd like to be better at with the needs and requirements and expectations of different careers and opportunities in their community and beyond. So let's talk about curriculum and instruction related to supporting a student's employment goals and transition plan to reach them. Best practice tells us that building student awareness and readiness for career pathways that align with their strengths, needs, preferences, and employment-related transition goals ends up being equal parts experience and instruction. The most effective strategies integrate both simultaneously, and career development classes are one approach to achieving this. These classes require curriculum to be aligned with the state and career standards and to include learning experiences in the school and community that build a student's soft skills, self-management skills, and knowledge about different career pathways, including relevant jobs and how to obtain them. So that might include knowledge about education, training, or credentials required for those fields. Just like when we teach academic knowledge and skills, career development classes should take a structured approach that includes identifying a sequence of learning objectives for students that build towards more complex skills. It also includes aligning those learning objectives with state standards and career standards, and then designing a sequence of activities that includes the use of technology and 21st century skills, as well as employability skills for a wide variety of occupational clusters. And that provides students with course choices to match their preferences, interests, and needs. All instruction should incorporate universal design for learning, as well as differentiated instruction and supports for social skills, So that might be interpersonal, conversational, negotiation, conflict, group skills, and context. It should also include supports for study skills and organizational skills, as well as personal management. And in defining and providing learning experiences in and outside of the school for these career development classes, the team, in conjunction with young people and families, needs to support from school leadership for building partnerships with agencies, community partners, and employers, because doing so ensures that the curriculum is aligned with the sequence of knowledge and skill building milestones that align with career pathway requirements, so how to actually enter those different careers once they've graduated. In addition, community-based instruction for developing career awareness is typically only possible when schools have strong partnerships with businesses that allow for opportunities for mock interviews or maybe job shadowing and internships, as well as career fairs. Transition plans for independent living are the sum of many parts. At their core are learning and skill building opportunities for young people to practice home skills, transportation skills, managing their health and wellness, and how to balance a budget, as well as decision making across these different areas, and how to use tools like assistive technology to increase their access to opportunities. So these are but a few of the many areas of skill that young people should have direct instruction and community-based learning experiences to grow and develop in. Given that as students grow and set goals, their plans must change to meet them where they are, young people, their families, and professionals need to continuously work together to develop the plan for where and how young people want to live that aligns with their goals for work, school, recreation, leisure, and civic engagement. While they continue to build their independent living skills, young people also need opportunities for learning strategies for exploring housing options, including the funding and support services that are available to access them, as well as time with mentors and counselors to reflect upon some of these options, supports, and services within the context of their goals for independent living and their current progress towards them. With respect to funding, young people with more significant needs and their families may need specific guidance on the use of waivers, which is a process where the federal government waives Medicaid rules for institutional care in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania funds can be used to provide supports and services for people closer to home and in their own communities. Just like a transition plan for employment goals, we should take a structured approach to teaching these skills and designing learning experiences that help students build upon core skills to build towards more advanced ones. As students advance, new learning experiences become possible that place a stronger emphasis on application in the real world through community-based experiences. While students are learning new skills and planning for future living arrangements, stakeholders need to take an active role in connecting them and their families with services and supports in the community, such as Centers for Independent Living. So CILs can provide information and referrals. They can provide independent living skills training to supplement what's already happening in the school. They can also provide individual and systems advocacy and peer-to-peer counseling. In addition to CILs, young people and families need support for connecting with nonprofits and community partners, building relationships with their peers and other community members, and linking up with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Connecting with services and supports will increase opportunities for learning experiences that young people have that align with their independent living goals. And as this happens, planning needs to expand to include new and existing partners. Keep in mind that when it comes to independent living and transition planning, we should be taking a person-centered approach to transition assessment data collected across these domains here, not just before the plan is made, but ongoing while students participate in activities to build their knowledge and skills towards their independent living goals. Domains of focus for both learning activities and assessment for independent living are one and the same. They include money management, and that might be Young people learning how to research and compare products, counting money, knowing the parts of a paycheck, and how to participate in banking online and in person, as well as balancing their budgets and paying bills. It includes transportation skills, so knowing those options that are available to them and how to use them, and also knowing about supports and services to help them develop skills to use those transportation options effectively. Managing their health and wellness, so knowing about exercise, a balanced budget, understanding the types of medical professionals and when to see them, managing medications and preventing illness, so preventative medicine as well, and knowing about options for support services from agencies and community partners related to managing their health and wellness. We've also got knowing about benefits and how to access them, so like we talked about before, waivers, but also SSI and Social Security disability insurance, as well as Medicaid and Medicare. Young people also need opportunities to build skills in and to be assessed on home skills, so that's cleaning and repairing and maintenance around the house, food management, so that's planning, buying, and cooking, knowing about options for support services to help them build these skills, just like the other domains, and also tools for access. So across these domains, what tools in terms of accessibility and management, mobility are available to them to help them to maximize their participation in the community across these domains and to do it as independently as possible. When working with young people to continuously implement and update their plans for independent living, we should help them to also continuously unpack some of these questions, such as, do they want to live alone, with family, with roommates, and if so, who and how many? What details about a home are important to them? If they should and how they should base their decisions upon where they want to work, local transportation options, where their friends live, where their family members live, as well as what hobbies and activities they want to have access to, and the characteristics of a home that are important to them. So, is having a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or a parking space, an apartment, or a townhouse, or a regular house? Is that important to them? Is access to different buildings and supports close by important to them? So these are questions that we need to continuously help young people to unpack, because they'll change as their goals change and as they grow and develop their independent living skills. Post-secondary education represents a web of potential pathways that students can take, which may or may not involve participation in college-based programs. Post-secondary education falls into 3 major domains, which are training that is not affiliated with an institution of higher learning, college-based programs, and CTE, or career and technical education, which tends to blend both of these worlds together. A key evidence-based predictor of successful education and employment are programs and supports that work to bridge academic and career preparation between the secondary and post-secondary level. These often include CTE and pre-college programs where students might earn credits towards a degree or certificate while still enrolled in high school. Pre-college programs are important for students to build their awareness of programs, services, and supports at the post-secondary level that best match their employment and career goals. In some instances, CTE provides career preparation where students complete academic content that is aligned to the knowledge requirements of a particular field, while they also participate in hands-on learning experiences in the field while still enrolled in high school. Curriculum and instruction in high school need to be aligned to the relevant career readiness standards and prerequisite knowledge or skills for the career pathways that students are interested in pursuing. Assessments also need to inform students on their progress toward meeting post-secondary requirements by providing objective information for their attainment of industry-validated technical knowledge, employability skills, and academic knowledge. Importantly, all students should have the opportunity to receive additional academic support and coaching while still in high school so that they can meet the academic expectations of the post-secondary programs that are aligned with their career pathway of interest. When all curriculum, instruction, and assessment are aligned to the requirements of post-secondary programs, training, and credentials, this continuity allows for credit transfer agreements and pre-college programs so that students can simultaneously earn prerequisite credits towards specific programs at the post-secondary level while completing their secondary studies in high school. However, we know that creating a course of study doesn't end with aligning curriculum, instruction, and assessment at the high school level with the requirements and expectations of post-secondary programs. Really, we also need to support students in setting post-secondary goals that help them to identify the pathways that are right for them and then to navigate these pathways successfully. While this alignment of programmatic components is necessary for creating career track options, person-centered planning is the driving force that supports ongoing learning experiences in the school and community that build a student's ability to set post-secondary goals and make a plan to achieve them. Taking an evidence-based approach to supporting young people in their transition from high school to post-secondary education and training begins in high school with youth, families, and stakeholders working together to identify post-secondary goals for employment, adult learning, and independent living. We know that these goals are strongly reliant on one another, given that education influences an individual's future career options, which then further influences their independent living goals. Not to mention that where and how young people want to live also impacts their options for continued learning and employment. Adult learning is also about achieving goals for personal growth, which might be knowledge, but could also be building skills for living social and independent lives as these young people define it. In all, translating these goals for employment, learning, and living into a pathway for post-secondary education and training after high school requires teams of youth, families, and stakeholders to truly take a person-centered and a whole-person approach to considering what those post-secondary goals are against these many factors shown here. It's important to consider programmatic factors such as admission requirements, funding, features of academic courses of study, which might be the credit loads and requirements of courses or course sequence requirements, as well as prerequisites and required learning activities like internships. We also need to help young people and their families consider supports for career readiness while in post-secondary programs, as well as supports for academic success, which might be coaching or accommodations and modifications, as well as supports for emotional health and social well-being on campus. Equally important are factors such as program outcomes and how they relate to a student's career goals, as well as factors such as options for housing and supports and inclusion within the campus and community that would align with their goals for independent living and community engagement. So just to wrap up, our big three themes from this video are: we want to first increase the depth of information gathered about young people's strengths, needs, preferences, and abilities. And we do this by using informal and formal transition assessments through an ongoing basis, formally and informally, with youth, families, and stakeholders. And in using these tools, we want to make sure that they represent the principles of universal design for learning so that all assessment opportunities are equitable for young people and their families. Our final theme of this video is that we want to implement a team-based approach at all stages of the transition planning process, where youth, families, and stakeholders continuously co-review transition assessment data and co-create goals, as well as the plan to achieve them. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch with us today. We hope you enjoyed this overview of transition planning and how to really infuse a whole person and person-centered approach to the transition planning process.